I spent 9 years building something my sister put her name on, and the night she tried to destroy me with it, she handed me a stage instead. My name is Gabriella Renner. I'm 34. I'm a wildlife photographer based out of Missoula, Montana. And for most of my adult life, my older sister Margot has been the version of me that people clapped for. She called it our family's conservation legacy. She posted about it. She gave speeches about it. She accepted awards for it. Every single photograph that made her famous, I took them. All of them. Every frame. Every frozen morning crouched in the brush along the Blackfoot River waiting for light that might never come. But here's what Margot didn't know when she invited me to that gala. She didn't know I'd been building something of my own for years. She didn't know that the keynote speaker she personally requested had already seen my work and knew exactly whose name belonged on it. She built the stage. She sent the invitations. She wrote my name on the guest list as a courtesy, and I walked in carrying something she never expected. Before I take you back to where this started, I need you to understand something. By the end of this story, you're going to watch my sister's face in a room full of 200 people when she realizes the keynote isn't about her. If that sounds like something you don't want to miss, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this one, I promise, this one lands different. Now, I already know some of you are thinking, she probably deserved a second chance. And some of you are thinking, she deserved worse than what she got. Drop which side you're on in the comments. I'm curious. Let me take you back to March of 2015. The spring I moved back to Missoula after finishing my photography certificate at Montana State. Margot is 4 years older than me. Margot Renner Caldwell now. She married Wes Caldwell in 2016. This real estate guy from Helena with family money and a smile that made you feel you were always interrupting something more important. But back in 2015, Margot was already running what she called the Renner Land Trust. It was this small conservation outfit focused on wildlife corridors between Missoula and the Bitterroot Valley. And look, on paper, it was a beautiful thing. Protecting migration paths, partnering with ranchers, educating the community about habitat fragmentation. The problem was, Margot didn't do any of the field work. She didn't do the photography. She didn't write the grant proposals. She didn't spend 4-hour pre-dawn shifts in 17-degree weather waiting for elk to cross Highway 93. I did. I did all of it, from the first season. And at first, honestly, I didn't care whose name was on it. I was 25, freshly certified, and my older sister was giving me a platform. She had connections. She had a mailing list. She had this way of walking into a room and making people feel they were joining something important. Margot could sell anything, including me. The issue was that she sold me as her. It started small. She'd post my photos on the Trust's Instagram without tagging me. She'd present my field reports at county meetings and say, "we," when she meant, "Gabriella did this alone at 4 a.m. She'd describe locations she'd never been to with this confidence that made everyone in the room nod along. And our mother, Donna, I love my mother, I do. But Donna Renner has never once in her life corrected Margot about anything. Not once. Mom would just smile and say, "You girls make such a good team." We weren't a team. I was the engine. Margot was the paint job. By 2017, the Trust had real traction. We'd secured a $34,000 grant from the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Margot signed the paperwork. Margot gave the interview to the Missoulian. Margot stood in front of a banner at the Missoula Community Foundation dinner and accepted a community leadership plaque, while I sat at table 9 with Wes and a bottle of sparkling water that had gone flat 20 minutes earlier. I remember Wes leaned over to me during the applause and said, "She's really good at this, isn't she?" And I just nodded, because yeah, she was really good at this. That was the whole problem. The dynamic at home was even worse. Every Sunday, we'd have dinner at our parents' place on Rattlesnake Drive. Our mother would cook. Our father, he passed in 2019, Parkinson's, would sit at the head of the table saying less and less each year. And Margot would hold court. She'd tell stories about her week in the field, my week in the field, and our mother would beam. She'd pull up the trust's Instagram on her phone and show Dad the latest post, my photograph. No credit. Dad would nod slowly and say, "That's my girl." He was looking at Margot when he said it. I sat through that every Sunday for 3 years. One time, November 2017, I think, I tried to say something. We were clearing the table and I mentioned that the osprey photographs on the Trust's latest newsletter were mine. Specifically, mine. Taken during a solo trip to Salmon Lake. I didn't say it aggressively. I just said, "Those were my shots, by the way." Margot didn't even look up from her phone. She said, "Gabby, everything you do for the Trust is the Trust's work. That's how nonprofits work. When you understand the business side, you'll get it." Our mother handed me a dish towel and said, "She's right, honey. It's a team effort." I dried the dishes and drove home. That same year, I started building something on my own, quietly. I'd been taking personal photographs, not for the Trust, not for Margot's Instagram, just for me. Grizzlies in the Swan Range, wolves near the Garnet Mountains, a wolverine I tracked for 6 weeks through the Rattlesnake Wilderness before I got a single usable frame. 6 weeks. 41 days of hikes, trail cameras, and false leads before one frozen morning at 5:52 a.m. The animals stepped into a clearing and looked directly at my lens for 3 seconds. 3 seconds. And I got the shot. I started submitting to publications. Small ones at first. Montana Outdoors, Northern Rockies Conservation Journal. Nothing flashy. But the work was good. I knew it was good because editors started calling me back. I didn't tell Margot. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell anyone except Pamas Okafor. He's a photographer I met at a workshop in Bozeman in 2016. Freelance, mostly editorial work for outdoor magazines. Nigerian American. Grew up in Billings. Moved to Missoula the same year I came back. He had this quiet intensity about his own work. He photographed prairie dogs and burrowing owls, the species nobody glamorizes, and he treated every shoot like it mattered. Tomas was the first person who ever looked at my portfolio and said, "Why isn't your name on any of this?" And I said something stupid like, "It's a family thing. It's complicated." He just stared at me. Didn't argue. Didn't push. Just stared until I heard how that sounded out loud. That stare changed something. Not immediately. I wasn't ready to blow up my family over a look. But Tomas became the person who asked me the questions I was avoiding. He'd seen Margot post one of my shots on the Trust page and text me a screenshot with no caption. Just the screenshot. And that silence said more than any lecture could have. Meanwhile, Margot was building her brand. She launched a podcast called Wild Renner, 23 episodes about her life in conservation. She got invited to speak at the Western Montana Fair. The Missoula Current did a profile on her titled Conservation's Hometown Champion. She was photographed in the field wearing these pristine Patagonia vests. And I mean pristine. The woman has never gotten mud on a single pair of boots she owns. I once watched her pose at a trailhead for a photographer she'd hired. She'd hired someone to photograph the photographer she was pretending to be, and she was holding one of my cameras. A camera she'd never loaded a memory card into. By 2019, the Renner Land Trust had a $78,000 annual budget. Margot had hired a part-time assistant, paid, obviously, $22 an hour. I was still unpaid. 4 years of fieldwork, 300 and something published photographs on the Trust's platforms, and my compensation was exposure. The specific kind of exposure where my name never appeared. I want to be clear about the math here. In 4 years, I'd contributed an estimated 2,400 hours of fieldwork, photography, and grant writing to the Trust. At even a modest freelance rate of $45 an hour, that's $108,000 of labor. Margot's total payment to me across those 4 years was exactly $0. She bought me a $120 jacket for Christmas in 2017 and told me to wear it in the field. It'll look great for photos. And then came Thanksgiving 2018. I'd just come back from a 9-day solo trip documenting wolfpack behavior near Ovando. I was exhausted, sunburned across my nose and cheeks despite the cold. My right knee was swollen from a fall on day 7. I'd slipped on a scree slope and caught myself badly. And Margot looked at me across the table, bread roll in her hand, and said, "Gabby, I don't know why you insist on doing the hard part when the real skill is what I do. Anyone can point a camera. Not everyone can build what I've built." My mother laughed. Wes didn't even look up from his plate. My father blinked slowly and went back to his mashed potatoes. I excused myself and sat in my truck in my parents' driveway for 45 minutes. The heat was running because it was November in Montana, and the temperature was dropping fast. I just sat there with my hands on my knees, engine idling, trying to figure out why that one sentence hurt worse than the cold, worse than the knee, worse than any of it. Because she didn't say it mean. That's the thing about Margot. She said it the way you'd correct a child about table manners. She was helping me understand something obvious. Anyone can point a camera. I want to pause here for a second, because if you've ever stayed in something, a family, a relationship, a job, not because it was good, but because leaving meant admitting the whole thing was broken, then you already know what that silence sounds like. The one where you're not confused anymore, you're just tired. If that hits you somewhere, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your version of that moment. Because the question Tomas asked me that spring, the one I still think about, is what finally cracked the whole thing open. In the spring of 2019, Tomas asked me a question that I still think about. We were at his apartment on South Higgins, processing photos on his kitchen table, coffee getting cold between our laptops. He'd just seen Margot post my Wolf series as a Trust field update, with the caption, "Another incredible week in the Blackfoot Valley." She'd been in Spokane that week visiting Wes's family, and he set his laptop down, looked at me, and said, "What are you scared of?" I didn't have a good answer. I just said, "She's my sister." "That's not a reason," he said. "That's a leash." He didn't say it cruelly. He said it like he was reading a fact off a page. And I knew he was right. The same way you know a bruise is there before you press it. That same month, I got an email from an editor at High Country News asking if I'd be willing to license 3 wolf images. They'd seen my work in the Northern Rockies Conservation Journal. The fee was $1,700 for 3 shots. I said yes before I finished reading the email. I didn't tell Margot. But more importantly, I started keeping records. Not dramatically, not like I was planning some courtroom showdown. I just started screenshotting. Every time Margot posted one of my images without credit. Every time she presented my field data at a donor meeting as her own. Every time she used I when she meant Gabriella. Every Trust newsletter. Every social media caption, every presentation deck she sent to donors with my photographs and her name. By the end of 2019, I had a folder on my laptop with over 200 screenshots. I called it Archive. Tomas called it Evidence. I told him he was being dramatic. He raised one eyebrow and went back to his coffee. Then, in January 2020, something happened that I still think about at least once a week. I got a Google alert. I'd set one for the Trust's name, just to track mentions, and it pinged me a link to a photography competition, the Northern Rockies Wildlife Photo Contest. Big deal in our world. Sponsored by Patagonia and the Montana Wilderness Association. Cash prize, exhibition at the Missoula Art Museum, publication in their annual book. Margot had entered 4 photographs. My photographs. I recognized them immediately. The grizzly sow and twin cubs I'd shot at dawn on the Blackfoot River in September 2018. The osprey dive sequence from Salmon Lake. The moose calf series from the Clearwater. And the one that made my stomach drop. The Wolverine. My Wolverine. 6 weeks of tracking. 41 days. The photograph I was most proud of in my entire career. Submitted under the name Margot Renner Caldwell. I sat in my truck outside the post office on Broadway for maybe 20 minutes staring at my phone screen. I wasn't angry yet. That came later. I just felt this, I don't know how to describe it, this hollow clarity. Like a window had been cleaned and the view behind it was terrible. I called Tomas. He picked up on the second ring and I just said, "She entered my Wolverine." He was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then he said, "So what are you going to do about it?" And for the first time in 4 years, I had an answer. I didn't confront Margot. I didn't tell my mom. I contacted the contest organizers directly. I sent them the raw files, every original with full EXIF data, camera serial number, GPS coordinates, timestamps down to the second, digital forensics that couldn't be faked or argued with. I explained the situation calmly, professionally, in a 3-page email with 14 attachments. I asked them to verify. They did. It took 11 days. On February 3, 2020, I received an email confirming that my submission, under my name, Gabriella Renner, had been accepted as the verified original photographer. Margot's entry was quietly disqualified. She never found out. They just sent her a generic rejection letter, and Margot being Margot, she blamed the judges. She told our mom the contest was political. She posted on Instagram about how the system doesn't always reward the right people. 47 likes. 8 sympathetic comments from people who had no idea. I didn't say a word. By 2021, I had 2 completely separate professional identities. There was Gabby, the invisible engine of the Renner Land Trust, still doing fieldwork 3 to 4 days a week, still unpaid, still uncredited. And there was Gabriella Renner, the wildlife photographer whose work had appeared in Montana Outdoors, High Country News, and as of March 2021, a full feature spread in Audubon magazine. 12 pages, 14 photographs, a pull quote that said, "Renner's work captures the patience and solitude that most wildlife photographers only aspire to." Nobody in my family knew about the second version of me. Not Margot, not my mom, not Wes. The Audubon feature ran nationally, and not a single person in my family saw it because none of them actually read conservation publications. They just liked the Instagram version of conservation, the curated posts, the pretty pictures, the performative passion. Nobody in that family had ever subscribed to Audubon. Meanwhile, Margot was escalating. She'd hired a social media manager at $3,200 a month. She'd trademarked the Renner Land Trust logo. She was talking about writing a book, a memoir of my life in the field. And she'd started referring to herself at events and on her LinkedIn profile as a wildlife photographer and conservationist, not nonprofit director, not fundraiser, photographer. My job title, on her professional page. And then, in April 2021, she did something that still makes my hands go cold. She applied for a $52,000 federal conservation grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And in the application, she listed herself as the Trust's lead field researcher and principal photographer. She attached 26 of my photographs as evidence of her fieldwork, and she forged field notes. Actual forged notes. She used my handwriting samples from our shared cloud drive, traced and rewritten in her own approximation, to fabricate field reports from locations she'd never visited on dates she was in Helena or Spokane. She listed my Wolverine photograph as her signature piece. I found out because the grant reviewer called me directly. A woman named Dr. Linnea Voss from the National Wildlife Federation. They were partnering with USFWS on this particular grant cycle. She'd seen my Audubon spread 3 months earlier. She recognized the Wolverine instantly. And she said, very calmly, "Ms. Renner, I need to ask you something. Did your sister take this photograph?" I said, "No, ma'am, I did." Dr. Voss said, "I thought so. We need to talk." That phone call was 47 minutes long. I told her everything. 9 years of it. The unpaid labor, the missing credits, the contest submission, the Instagram captions, the podcast episodes where Margot described field experiences that were mine. Dr. Voss listened without interrupting once, and when I finished, she said, "Gabriella, I've been in this field for 31 years. What your sister is doing isn't just wrong, it's federal grant fraud." I sat on my kitchen floor after that call. Just sat there with my back against the cabinet and my phone in my lap. The apartment was quiet, just me and the hum of the refrigerator. And I wasn't crying. I was thinking. I was thinking about every time I'd made it easy for Margot. Every time I'd handed her my work and told myself it didn't matter because we were family. Because she was my older sister. Because she was the one who knew how to work a room, and maybe I was wrong to want credit for something I did alone in the dark. But not anyone can track a Wolverine for 41 days. Not anyone can sit in 22-degree darkness waiting for grizzlies. Not anyone can do what I did. Nobody takes a picture for you. I've been holding all of this in my chest for a long time now, and I think I just need a second here. Because what happened at that gala? If someone had told me 2 years earlier that I'd be standing in a room full of 200 people while my sister's world came apart, I would have said no, not possible. But some people don't stop until they're stopped, and Margot had never been stopped. So let me ask you this. If you had 9 years of proof that someone was stealing your work, your identity, your name, and you had the chance to end it publicly or privately, which would you choose? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to know. Because what I didn't know yet, what Dr. Voss told me 3 weeks later, was that Margot's federal grant application had triggered a formal review. And that review was going to change everything about the way this ended. The Montana Conservation Gala, October 14th, 2022. The Doubletree Hotel in downtown Missoula, the big ballroom on the 2nd floor. 211 guests, according to the seating chart Margot printed on cardstock. White tablecloths, silent auction items along the back wall, a slideshow running on loop on the main screen. And every third photograph in that slideshow was mine. Margot organized the whole thing. 8 months of planning. The theme was Legacy and Land, a celebration of the Renner Land Trust's first decade. She'd booked the venue, secured the sponsors, printed the programs with her name in gold lettering on the cover. She'd prepared a 20-minute presentation about her decade of field photography. And she'd personally invited Dr. Linnea Voss as the keynote speaker. She thought she was getting the ultimate validation, a federal-level conservationist endorsing her work in front of the entire Missoula community. She'd mentioned it to our mother every Sunday for 2 months. "Dr. Voss is coming to speak at my gala, Mom." I'd been in contact with Dr. Voss for 5 months by that point. She'd reviewed everything. The raw files, the EXIF data, the screenshots, the forged field notes, the grant application with my work under Margot's name. 412 documented items. 9 years of evidence. Dr. Voss hadn't come to celebrate Margot. She'd come to honor me. But standing in my apartment that afternoon, getting dressed, I still didn't know exactly what tonight would look like. Dr. Voss had told me she'd present the findings. She hadn't told me the format. Part of me was hoping she'd just hand me the certificate quietly after dinner. A private acknowledgement, maybe a few witnesses, nothing public. I wasn't sure I wanted a room full of people watching my sister fall apart. I'd spent 9 years protecting her from consequences. Wanting them and fearing them felt exactly the same. I arrived at 6:47 p.m. I wore a dark green dress I'd bought at a consignment shop on North Higgins for $38. Tomas drove me because my hands were shaking too badly to grip a steering wheel. He parked his truck on Front Street and walked me to the side entrance, and before I went in, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You already did the hard part. Tonight's just the receipt." The first person I saw inside was my mother, Donna Renner, front row, good pearls, the ones she only brings out for church and Margot's events. She waved at me, not unkind, just surprised. I clearly wasn't part of the main event in her mind. I was background. Margot found me within 3 minutes. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer, hair professionally blown out, full makeup, heels that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She hugged me and said, loud enough for the people near the bar to hear, "Gabby, I'm so glad you came. I almost didn't put you on the list, but I thought, family is family, right?" She laughed. The people nearby laughed. I just smiled and said, "I wouldn't have missed it. If you're still here, hit that like button. You want to be here for what's next." Dinner was salmon and roasted vegetables. Wes sat next to me and talked about the Bozeman real estate market for 20 straight minutes. Average home prices, interest rate projections, a condo development he was investing in near Big Sky. I ate and nodded. My mother complimented Margot's speech preparation. Margot moved between tables, touching people's shoulders, thanking donors, leaning down to whisper something that made each person feel special. She pointed at the slideshow and said things like, "That grizzly shot. That was a rough morning, let me tell you, but so worth it." During dessert, Margot circled back to our table. She put her hand on my shoulder, in front of 2 donors from the Bitterroot Land Coalition, and said, "This is Gabby, my little helper. She tags along on some of the field days. Honestly, I don't think she'd even own a camera if I hadn't gotten her started." She squeezed my shoulder and moved on before I could respond. The 2 donors smiled at me politely. One of them said, "That must be nice, having a sister to look up to." I put my fork down and stared at my plate until my vision cleared. That grizzly shot. The sow and twin cubs. September 14th, 2018. Blackfoot River. I was alone. 22 degrees. I'd been in position since 4:15 a.m. My fingers were so numb I almost missed focus. Margot was asleep in her king bed in Helena that morning. She texted me at 10:03 a.m. asking me to grab something scenic for the newsletter. Dr. Voss took the podium at 8:22 p.m. I know because I was watching the clock on my phone under the table, counting breaths. She was calm, professional, gray blazer, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, silver hair pulled back. She thanked the organizers. She talked about the state of conservation in Montana, habitat loss statistics, funding gaps, the critical importance of field documentation. She praised the community's dedication. Standard keynote material. Margot was nodding along in the front row like a student hoping to be called on. And then Dr. Voss said, "Tonight, I have the honor of presenting a special recognition. This year, the National Wildlife Federation conducted an independent review of outstanding conservation photography in the Northern Rockies. We reviewed over 300 portfolios, and the photographer whose body of work stood above all others for its technical mastery, its commitment to solitary fieldwork, and its extraordinary documentation of species at risk, is someone in this room tonight." Margot straightened in her seat. I watched her do it from table 6. She smoothed her blazer, tilted her chin. She had this expression, I've seen it 100 times, where she's already writing the acceptance speech in her head. The recipient of the 2022 NWF Northern Rockies Conservation Photography Award, with a $25,000 grant and a permanent exhibition at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, Wyoming, is Gabriella Renner. Silence. Not the polite kind. The kind where 200 people are recalculating everything they thought they knew. The kind where you can hear someone's water glass touch the tablecloth 3 tables away. I stood up. My legs were trembling, but my face was still. I could feel my heartbeat in my wrists, in my neck, in the backs of my knees. I walked to the podium between tables of people who were looking at me like they'd never seen me before. And most of them hadn't. Not really. I'd been the quiet one at Margot's events for years, the sister who helped set up chairs. I shook Dr. Voss's hand and I said, "Thank you," into the microphone. That's all. Just, thank you. And I meant it with everything I had. Behind me, Margot's chair scraped the floor. Dr. Voss didn't stop there. She'd prepared a presentation. 6 slides. Each one showed a photograph from the Trust's promotional materials on the left, credited to Margot or uncredited, and on the right, the same photograph's original raw file metadata. My name, my camera serial number, my GPS coordinates, timestamps that proved I was alone in the wilderness while Margot was hours away in a different city. She didn't use the word fraud. She just showed the images, read the metadata, and let 200 people do the math. Slide 1. The grizzly sow and cubs. I gripped the edge of my chair with both hands. Slide 2. The osprey dive. My mouth was dry. Slide 3. My wolverine. I watched Margot's jaw tighten, a muscle moving beneath her skin that I'd never noticed before. By slide 4, a series of elk crossing Highway 93, people were turning in their seats to look at Margot. I couldn't feel my fingers. Margot stood up. She tried. She said, loud enough for the room, "This is a misunderstanding. Gabriella and I work together. These are collaborative images." Dr. Voss paused, adjusted her glasses, said, "Ms. Renner Caldwell, the EXIF metadata on these files shows a single camera body registered to Gabriella Renner. The GPS coordinates place the photographer in remote wilderness areas with no secondary location data. The timestamps correspond to periods when, according to your own social media posts, you were in Helena, Spokane, and Bozeman, respectively. There is no evidence of collaboration in any of these files." Someone at a back table set their fork down audibly. A murmur moved through the room like a wave. Margot looked at our mother. And Donna Renner, front row, good pearls, the woman who'd spent 9 years saying, "You girls make such a good team," looked down at her napkin and kept her eyes there. That was the moment. Not the award, not the slides. The moment my mother couldn't look at Margot. Margot grabbed her clutch and walked out through the side door. Her heels clicked on the tile and then went silent. Wes followed about 30 seconds later, stopping to shake a few hands on the way like he was leaving a business lunch. Very Wes. I stood at that podium for another 4 minutes. I thanked Dr. Voss. I thanked the community. I talked about the real work, the cold mornings, the failed shots, the 6-week Wolverine track. I didn't mention my sister's name. Not once. Being seen is not the same as being credited. I learned the difference the hard way. When I sat back down, my mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it, and I let her, even though that hand had been available for 9 years, and she'd never once offered it. The next 72 hours were chaos. By 10 p.m. that same night, someone at the gala had posted a video clip of the metadata slides to Twitter. By morning, it had been shared over 3,000 times. The caption was, "Montana conservation influencer exposed for stealing sister's photography work." A Reddit thread hit the front page of r/photography by noon. The Missoula Current, the same outlet that profiled Margot as conservation's hometown champion, published a follow-up piece the next day. Headline: Renner Land Trust founder accused of systematic credit theft. Margot's Instagram went private by 2 p.m. Her podcast pulled its last 4 episodes from Spotify. 3 trust sponsors, including a Missoula brewing company and a regional outdoor retailer, issued public statements distancing themselves within 48 hours. But before all of that, before the internet found us, before the sponsors pulled out, before any of it, there was that first night. I got back to my apartment around 10:30 p.m. Tomas offered to stay, but I told him I needed to be alone. I locked the door and stood in my kitchen for a while. I didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small one above the stove. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the pipes in the wall. No dog, no roommate, just me and the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of the hand soap I'd left open on the counter. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Same spot I'd sat after the call with Dr. Voss a year and a half earlier. Back against the cabinet, knees up, still in that green consignment shop dress. My hands were shaking. They'd been shaking since the podium. But I wasn't crying. I kept opening my phone and closing it. Opening it, closing it. There were already 14 texts. I didn't read any of them. I tried to eat a granola bar and couldn't get past the first bite. I ran the faucet and filled a glass of water and held it without drinking. I sat there for maybe an hour, maybe longer, I don't know. Time didn't work right that night. What I felt wasn't relief, not yet. It was closer to, I don't know how to say this. You carry something for 9 years and then it's suddenly not there, and your body doesn't know what to do. I kept bracing for something, flinching at nothing. My shoulders stayed tight against the cabinet. I kept expecting someone to walk through the door and take it all back. At some point, I took off my shoes and lined them up by the front door. I folded the dress over a kitchen chair. I got into bed at maybe midnight and stared at the ceiling until 3 a.m. I remember thinking, I did it. And then I remember thinking, now what? Tomas came over the next morning with coffee and bagels from Bagels on Broadway. He sat with me at the kitchen table. At one point he said, "How do you feel?" And I said, "I don't know yet." And he just nodded. He stayed for 2 hours and we barely spoke. Sometimes that's the only thing that helps. Someone sitting with you in the quiet while you figure out which parts of yourself are still in the same place. I checked Margot's Instagram that afternoon. Still public at that point. It went private a few hours later. Her bio still said, wildlife photographer and conservationist. 3 days after the gala, I laughed, out loud, alone in my apartment. The absurdity of it. She was still performing for an audience that had already seen the slides. Now, before I tell you what Margot did next, I want to ask you something. She's about to stop retreating. She's about to fight back, hard, with a PR consultant and a donor list and a story that almost convinces people I was the villain. Would you have fought back when she tried to rewrite the narrative? Or would you have let the evidence speak for itself? Tell me in the comments, because what she did next is the part that almost worked. Margot called me 17 times in 2 days. I didn't pick up once. On the third morning after the gala, she showed up at my apartment on South 3rd Street. I was sitting on the porch at 7 a.m. eating cereal in a fleece jacket, watching fog burn off the valley. Her white Audi pulled into the lot. She got out, still wearing sunglasses, even though it was overcast and barely 50 degrees. She stood at the bottom of my porch steps and said, "You could have come to me first. You could have talked to me like a sister instead of ambushing me in front of 200 people. I set my cereal on the railing. Margot, I spent 9 years coming to you first. You just never noticed. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept since October 14th. And for about half a second, I saw something behind her face. Not remorse, more with recognition. Like she was seeing the actual shape of what she'd done for the first time, and it scared her. Then it was gone. She put her shoulders back and said, "Mom's not talking to me. The sponsors pulled out. Wes is talking about our finances like I'm some kind of liability. My podcast is dead. My email is full of strangers calling me a thief. Are you happy now, Gabriella? Is this what you wanted?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her. And after a minute, she turned, got in her car, and sat there for 2 full minutes before driving away. Margot didn't disappear. She went on offense. Within a week, she'd hired a PR consultant out of Helena. The strategy was immediate and obvious. Reframe the entire narrative. She started calling the gala a family dispute. She told people I was jealous and emotionally unstable. She described the metadata presentation as a coordinated stunt by a disgruntled family member. She sent a mass email to the trust's donor list, 340 people. Subject line, "Setting the record straight." In it, she acknowledged that I'd taken some photographs, but claimed they were work for hire under the trust's umbrella, and that I'd agreed to let the trust use them without individual credit. She described the gala incident as a deeply hurtful family matter made public without my consent. She CC'd our mother. And here's the thing, it almost worked. Some people believed her. People who only knew the Instagram version of Margot, who'd listened to her podcast and read her newsletter and thought she was exactly the conservation hero she performed as for a decade. A few emailed me personally. One retired teacher from Florence wrote, "I hope you can find peace with your sister. Jealousy is a terrible thing." Jealousy. 9 years of unpaid labor and stolen credit, and a stranger called it jealousy. Tomas came over that night with takeout from Biga Pizza and his laptop. He'd been keeping his own archive since 2019. Screenshots, timestamps, social media captures with dates. Not because I asked, because he'd been watching. He spread it across my kitchen table and said, "She's going to try to make this your word against hers. The metadata doesn't lie, but people's memories do." So over 3 weeks, we built the comprehensive portfolio. Every original file, every GPS log, every email I'd sent Margot with photos attached, every text where she asked me to grab something, every social media post claiming my work. 412 items, 9 years of receipts. I sent the portfolio to Dr. Voss, the Missoula Current reporter, and the 3 sponsors who distanced themselves. Then I waited. The consequences didn't come in any clean order. They piled up, overlapping, one crashing into the next before the last one had finished landing. The Northern Rockies Wildlife Photo Contest issued a formal statement banning Margot from future submissions and retroactively flagging her 2020 entry as fraudulent. That same week, before the ink on that statement was even dry, the Montana Wilderness Association removed her from their advisory board by email. The Western Montana Fair pulled her from their 2023 speaker list. Her social media manager quit and posted a brief statement saying she'd been unaware of the circumstances. The USFWS review started in November 2022. I got a call from an investigator named Mark Peterson in early December. He was calm, methodical, asked me to walk through the timeline. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with him at my kitchen table. Buckley? No, I didn't have Buckley yet. I was alone, a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, reading off dates from my laptop while he typed. At one point, he said, "Ms. Renner, how confident are you in the GPS data for these field notes?" And I said, "I can tell you the exact temperature and wind direction for every one of those mornings, because I was the only person standing there." He was quiet for a moment, and then said, "That's going to matter." The review concluded in February 2023. They determined Margot's $52,000 grant application contained materially false representations of authorship and fieldwork. The grant was rescinded. The trust had already spent the money. Operating costs, the social media manager, a $9,400 website redesign. Margot and Wes had to take out a home equity loan on their Helena property, $61,000 after penalties and interest to repay the federal government. Before the financial dust even settled, the personal consequences hit. Wes filed for divorce in March 2023. I heard through our cousin Petra. She called me on a Saturday afternoon, voice careful, not sure whether I'd want to hear what she had to say. What broke the marriage wasn't the credit theft, Petra said. Wes had lived with that comfortably for years. It was the forged field notes, forgery on a federal application. He told Petra, "I didn't sign up to be married to someone who commits federal crimes." Coming from a man who sat next to me for 6 years watching the whole thing happen. But people find their limits. His happened to be felony adjacent. And then there was a Thursday in late March. I remember because I'd just gotten back from a shoot and I was still wearing my field boots, when I thought maybe everything was going to unravel back in Margot's direction. The PR campaign was still circulating. A donor I'd never met called my cell, a woman named Carol from the Bitterroot Land Coalition, and said, "I just want to understand both sides. Margot says these were collaborative projects." Her voice was polite but uncertain, and for about 30 seconds, I felt the ground shift. If donors were still calling, still unsure, then Margot's version of the story was still alive. I sent Carol the metadata portfolio that evening. She never called back. But those 30 seconds, that was the closest I came to doubting whether the truth would be enough. And then my mother, Donna Renner. She called me on a Tuesday evening in April 2023. I'd just gotten back from a 3-day shoot in the Scapegoat Wilderness, and I was running a bath. She said, "Gabriella, I owe you an apology." I almost dropped my phone. "I saw it," she said. "I saw what she was doing, and I told myself it wasn't that bad. I told myself you girls would work it out between yourselves, the way sisters do. That was wrong. I should have said something years ago. I didn't say it was okay, because 9 years is a long time to watch your daughter disappear behind someone else's name. But I said, 'Thank you for saying that, Mom,' and I meant it." It's been about 3.5 years since the gala. I live in the same apartment on South 3rd. I adopted a dog in spring 2023, a mutt named Buckley. 1 ear up, 1 ear sideways, and he snores loud enough to hear from the next room. He comes with me on every shoot now, which is unprofessional, but he once sat perfectly still for 40 minutes while I photographed a great blue heron at Lee Metcalf Wildlife Refuge. Better field discipline than most humans. My career became something I didn't know how to imagine before. National Geographic's conservation vertical published a 12-page spread on my Bitterroot Wolfpack documentation in January 2024. I've lectured twice at the University of Montana's Environmental Studies program. A publisher in Bozeman approached me about a book, a photography collection focused on Montana's endangered species corridors. We're working on it now. Estimated release next fall. And my Wolverine photograph, the original, hangs permanently in the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, Wyoming. North Gallery. The placard reads, "Gabriella Renner, Rattlesnake Wilderness, Montana, 2017. I drove down to see it last summer. 8 hours each way. Buckley slept the whole ride." I found the North Gallery and stood in front of that frame. The print was larger than I expected, maybe 3 feet wide. The colors were right. The light was right. And the Wolverine's eyes were exactly what I remembered. Direct, unbothered, 3 seconds of an animal deciding whether I was worth its attention. I stood there for maybe 15 minutes. A family walked past and the father said to his kid, "Look at that one." And the kid pressed her face close to the glass and said, "How did someone get that close?" I almost said something. I didn't. I just stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets and read the placard 3 more times. Gabriella Renner. I cried in the parking lot. Buckley put his head on my lap, and I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off for 20 minutes before I could see the road clearly enough to start driving home. Nobody can take that from me. They just made me forget for a while. Tomas got a staff position with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We grab coffee at Break Espresso on Saturdays. He never says, "I told you so." He asks to see my latest work, and he's always honest. That honesty is worth more than I know how to say. My mother and I have dinner every other Thursday. We're figuring out how to be two adults who are both a little cracked by the same family. Last Thursday, she'd made pot roast, the same recipe she used to cook for Sunday dinners. I brought wine. We sat at her kitchen table, and she asked me about a pronghorn migration project I'd mentioned the week before. She asked specific questions: how long the migration corridor was, how I was handling the low light at dawn. I looked at her across the table, and she was leaning forward, actually listening, and I had to set my fork down because my throat got tight. She noticed and reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Same hand. Same table where she used to beam at Margot, but different now. She didn't mention it. Didn't have to. As for Margot, she lives in a rental in Helena. The divorce finalized August 2023. She lost the house. The Renner Land Trust was dissolved in November after the remaining board resigned. She works as an office manager at a property management company off Last Chance Gulch. I know because Mom told me. She hasn't called since the morning on my porch. 3.5 years of silence. I've picked up my phone and stared at her contact. Still, Margot with a mountain emoji. Maybe a dozen times. But I always put it down. Not because I'm angry. I passed angry somewhere in the second year. I just don't have anything to say to someone who looked at my work and decided it was hers. Maybe someday. I honestly don't know. I was out at the Blackfoot River last week. Same stretch where I shot the grizzly sow back in 2018. Same bend, same cottonwood stand. Same thin light coming through the valley in that way that only happens in Montana in early March, when winter is loosening but hasn't let go. Buckley was sitting next to my tripod, watching the water with total concentration. Every few minutes, his ears would twitch at a ripple, and he'd look back at me, checking whether I'd noticed. And I thought about Margot. Not with anger, not even sadness. I thought about how she used to call me on those early mornings when I was driving to the field in the dark. She'd say, "Get something good, Gabby." And I'd say, "I always do." And she'd laugh. And for a second, we were on the same side of something. She knew. She always knew what I was capable of. That's why she took it. If you've been here from the beginning, from that very first sentence, thank you. I mean that more than I probably know how to say right now. This story is the hardest thing I've ever told out loud. Harder than the gala. Harder than the aftermath. Harder than watching my sister walk out of that room with 200 people staring at her back. Because telling it means saying something I spent 9 years pretending wasn't true. That the person I trusted most looked at everything I built and decided I didn't deserve my own name on it. That hurt doesn't have a clean ending. It just gets quieter. But you stayed. All 12 parts. And that matters more than you realize. Because for a long time, nobody stayed. Nobody listened long enough to hear the whole thing. Tonight, you did. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had someone take credit for work only you know you did, or been invisible in a room full of people who should have seen you, hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because I think there are people out there right now, sitting in a truck in a parking lot, staring at their phone, trying to decide if they're allowed to say, "That's mine." I want them to know, yes, you are. Have you ever had to prove something was yours when everyone assumed it belonged to someone else? Not just work, maybe your idea, your talent, your name? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Sometimes just knowing someone else went through it, that's enough to make you pick up the camera again. And if you want more stories like this, the next one hits just as hard, I promise. Click whatever's on your screen. I'll be here. I was back at the river at dawn last Tuesday. Light through the cottonwoods, same as always. Buckley leaned against my knee. I adjusted the tripod, checked my settings, and waited for whatever the morning was going to give me. My name is Gabriella Renner. I'm a wildlife photographer, and every single frame I take is mine.